Say thank you very much for having me here. The talk is basically the talk I gave quite recently in Lyon, and we decided that it's too expensive to send you all to Lyon, so I decided to give the talk here. Those of you who sort of expect that this talk is going to be anything very technical may be disappointed, because in Lyon that was the forum was all kinds of speech people, including perception and linguists and so on and so on. So I didn't want to bother them with much of the engineering details. I have to also admit that not everything I remember, because the talk goes pretty much far in the back. So the talk is called My Adventures with Speech. Should be also adventures with many, many people. I'm sure that I forgot some of the names, but I try to remember enough whom I met during my career in speech. When I was thinking about where my adventures with speech started and where actually my scientific career started, I realized that I have to go way, way back. Way back was when I was 14 and I aspired to be one of these guys building communism in Czechoslovakia, then communist Czechoslovakia. I was told that I'm not supposed to go and study any further, and I'm supposed to be a laborer. So, of course, you know what happens if you tell a teenager not to do something. If you tell a teenager not to do something, it's guaranteed that he or she will do it. So I start beautifully repairing electric appliances. Then I smuggled myself into secondary technical school, and then I had no choice and go to technical university. And there I was, not anymore with these aspirations, but angry young man, confused what to do with my life. I was a young assistant professor, and I wasn't sure if I want to be a Bob Dylan, or if I want to be something like a Clint Eastwood here, actor, or if I want to be something like, say, John McCool. That was a John McCool when I was 20 or something, and John was 20.
Can we see a picture of you when you were 20?
A little bit more, sorry?
Can we see a picture of you when you were 20? That is it.
What happened to me was that suddenly I got a scholarship to go to Japan, and after 2 years gathering all appropriate stamps from everywhere, I actually end up in Japan with Professor Hiroya Fujisaki, who asked me, so what is it that you wanted to do here? I said, well, you know, I would like to build an LPC synthesizer. And he said, well, today is Monday, that will be done by Friday. What will you do for the rest of the year? I came for 1 year. Of course, what happened was that I was a little bit like a kid in a candy shop suddenly. It wasn't only the one copy of the linear prediction which I got from Czechoslovakia, but there was a whole library full of books. So, of course, I realized that there is more to life than just linear prediction and the synthesizer, to the point that Hiroya told me, well, you shouldn't read too much. And actually, this is his own words. I mean, he may be denying it now, but I could spend the whole hour talking about Hiroya Fujisaki, but I think I won't do it. What he meant there is that if you are looking for solutions in the books to your problems in the books, you are doing wrong thing. I'm not saying that you shouldn't read, but you should read just to get inspired to what will you do with your problem. So I realized that this was right. And I spent a little bit of time. Actually, instead of a year, I spent 4 years. And I actually did get my PhD from the University of Tokyo. And I came with a technique which is called spectral linear prediction, where there were some tricks where you could modify how much you want to fit, how well you want to fit the spectral envelope of speech, if you want to fit the tops, the peaks, or dips, just the zeros, or something in between. Well, it was good enough to get the PhD. Well, I found, in my applications, I found that what was optimal was to take the power spectrum of speech, that is intensity of the sound, and put it through the cubic root compression, so that then the spectral fit looked a little bit better. And at the time, I also wanted to impress other students, mainly the opposite sex. So I was started reading Psychology 101, and I discovered that relation between intensity of the sound and loudness of sound is a cubic root. And I said, very proudly, I went to, again, here I are, I told him, listen, I think I did something perceptual. He said, Hynek, you know nothing about perception, please don't talk about it. Okay, I didn't talk about it, but I did get my PhD, and I went to Santa Barbara, and life was good. And I was charged in starting to build the speech recognizers for Panasonic Technologies. And at that time, the problem was how to make a recognizer independent of the speaker who is speaking. So I read a little bit further in the Psychology 101 because I still remembered what Hiroya told me, and I thought, now I know a little bit more. So I came with various transformations, additional transformations on the spectrum, which I can tell you more about when we have more time, and ended up with a technique which is called perceptual linear prediction, which is, by the way, used until today. I mean, I'm totally amazed how that happened. Well, truth is that it worked reasonably well. The pictures which were different from different speakers, this is adult speech and this is children's speech, start becoming a little bit more similar by this auditory-like smoothing. So that was good. At this point, I was asked by then my boss, Hisashi Wakita, who was invited to write an article to the Festschrift for Ludmila Chistovich, and he didn't know probably what to do. See, he said, Hynek, you are working on these things, why don't you try to do something? So I said, I didn't know what Chistovich was doing at the time, but I started reading, and I discovered what she was proposing is that the auditory system is integrating spectral peaks when they get close enough, within about 3 to 4 critical bands. So I set up the synthesizer and started moving the peaks together and was trying to analyze it by then this PLP, because I had the sense that PLP may be doing something of this sort. And whoops, what happened was that there was indeed 2 peaks. At a certain point, suddenly you start seeing 1 peak. And it was happening somewhere around 3.5 critical bands. So that was one of these really pleasant things which I wish that everybody here gets at least once in a lifetime, and if you're lucky, many more times, that, you know, I just couldn't believe it myself. But indeed, the correct way of spectral smoothing of the spectrum yield the results which has been observed in perception of auditory stimuli by human beings. Dutifully, we of course decided that we need to, we were asked to patent everything because I was working for Panasonic Technologies, right? It was a commercial company. So we wrote a paper with my colleague Kazutsuga and send a proposal to Panasonic that maybe they should patent it. Fortunately for us, they decided that this invention doesn't have much of a practical value, which is of course good for you if you are a researcher, because then everybody can use it very freely. Mr. Nuji, I think, is by now retired, which probably is good for him because Kazutsuga is the president of Panasonic today. So I hope that, yeah, you know, he may not even remember that he's done that, but maybe he does, I don't know. But he's Anyways, next story was that I started playing around, I was in California, and I didn't like Southern California all that much. I actually was more driven towards Northern California. I had this friend called Nelson Morgan at ICSI who became a speech researcher at ICSI, International Computer Science Institute, and also I changed my job and I joined one of the Baby Bells. And I was pretty bored in Baby Bells, so I was spending quite a bit of time in California also. And when I started coming, we organized a little workshop with inviting a number of people who work in auditory modeling. I remember Malcolm Slaney was there, and Shiab Sharma was there, I think, and a number of people like that. Jordan Cohen was there. At the end of the one-day workshop, Jody Cohen stands up and says, well, you know what? Which of your models will address this problem? You take a speech, and I was hoping to play it for you, but of course I didn't play it in Lyon because it didn't work. It doesn't work here either. It works actually if it works like if I play it here just to show you that it actually might work.
Beat, beat,
right?
Beat, beat.
So the sound is beat. There is a vowel. So you take this spectrum of the vowel in the center here, and you find this envelope. And then you viciously, you design a filter which is exactly inverse of the spectral envelope, and put the speech through it so that the spectrum of the vowel becomes entirely flat, so no respectable phonetician would ever admit that that could possibly be E, right? But of course, if you play it, I mean, again, trust me, please. I mean, this is just like buying a used car.
Beat.
Close enough, right? I mean, of course, it sounds like filtered, but definitely everybody would agree that there is E, I hope. And he said, so which of your models will handle this problem? And we admitted nobody has a model like that, but of course, you start thinking about what you can do. And at the end, we decided that maybe the right solution would be to take a filters and filter every temporal trajectory through the filter. And after some playing, we end up with the filter which look like this. This is frequency response, this is impulse response. Filter passes changes which are as slow as, I mean, anything what is slower than once a second, 1 hertz, gets filtered out, and whatever is faster than like 10 to 15 hertz also gets filtered out. Filter is quite long, impulse response is about 200-300 milliseconds. And it was working reasonably well, because the problem which was there when you filtered the speech went away, because of course it filters out everything what doesn't change over time, right? So the fixed filter impulse response it makes your speech becomes invariant to that. So that was a good thing. Of course, another good thing is that it was working. At the time we had a problem at US West that we built a recognizer on data coming from Bell Labs or Bellcore, essentially from New Jersey. And it was working like a dream, and as long as you tested it on the data on which it was trained. But if you tested on data in Colorado, where our lab at the time was, it was hopeless. Error went from 3% to 60%, because of course our system was telephone system was better than the system in New Jersey. But the bottom line was it had a different frequency response. So after doing this, what we call Rasta filtering for reasons which are rather religious, but actually also stands for relative spectral, the problem went away. So that pretty much saved my butt at the time at US West, and they made me a distinguished member, senior member of technical staff, and so on, which meant that I can play a little bit more with the things. But I still was spending quite a bit of time at Berkeley, at California. At the time, we had this filter, which was passing modulation spectra between 1 hertz and say 10-15 hertz, and Steve Greenberg, who was hanging around, who knows much more about auditory perception than I do, told me, you know what, I mean, this is actually a very interesting thing, because you know where the human hearing is most sensitive? And he brought this picture which comes from some PhD thesis from Oxford, which very much was showing that human hearing is doing a very similar thing. Of course, that was known since 1928, since experiments of Rees from the laboratories, but I didn't know it at the time. But clearly, it was very interesting, because the filter which turned out to be optimal for our processing of speech was very much emulating what human hearing is doing in perception, what is called modulations. So I got very excited, obviously, about that. Started working on modulations. Then I already left US West in spite of the fact that they were quite nice to me, but clearly this venture was doomed. So I went to and joined academia finally again, and went to the OGI in Oregon, and started working more seriously on modulations. What we observed was indeed the most important modulation spectral components are somewhere between 1 hertz and say 16 hertz in both human perception, where we followed how the intelligibility of speech degrades when you take out some of the changes. The same thing was for machines. Machines are black, white, these are white. And of course, only to discover that that was suggested a long time ago, in 1940, by Homer Dudley. Homer Dudley was the guy who at Bell Laboratories developed what is called vocoder. So I just wanted to show it comes over and over again. I can give you more examples. There's been a lot of good work done before internet and before things were on the web. There is a lot of good stuff even before people introduced the computers, because these people maybe they didn't have the same computers we have or same softwares which we have, but they had very good brains, and they certainly were spending a lot of time thinking. So hats off to Homer Dudley, because he was telling us what really matters are the modulations. That's what carries the information in speech.
So is that to say now that we have computers, we don't have good brains?
We do have a good brains, but we waste a lot of time looking at the computers. That's what I would like to say. I mean, maybe not all of you, I don't know, I do. And so I spend most of my time checking emails nowadays. But people had more time, that's what I think, because they didn't have to worry so much about running computers. So then, of course, I got pretty cocky, and I sort of started walking around and telling all my colleagues, well, you know, machines should have ears. This picture I must have been showing many, many times. Some of you must have seen it at least 10 times. I said, technology today looks like this. And dumb people, I try to emulate what's happening in the biology without thinking, and, you know, copying the nature doesn't work. You have to understand, and so on. I can give the long talk on this topic. Only to hear from our friend Fred Jelinek, he said, well, yeah, sure. I mean, the airplanes do have wings. That is true. So by the same way, we should always try to emulate whatever we know about perception. But we have to make sure that we know it for sure. It has to be always based on the data. That was, you know, the Fred's mantra, so I don't have to repeat it here. And I started thinking about, said, well, actually he's right. So we start playing with the things which is called a data-driven design of the speech features. So there was one example here when we were trying to design spectral basis from using discriminant analysis. And what we observed, again, I mean, what we got out was very similar to what human hearing is doing. We got a basis where, when we projected the spectrum on this basis, resolution towards higher frequencies was decreasing, and was better at low frequencies, and so on and so on. Then we also came up with the idea that maybe we can also design raster filters this way. So, because if you take the vector along the time and label it with the phoneme which is in the center of this phoneme and put it into the linear discriminant analysis, your favorite MATLAB program, what comes out is the discriminant matrix which is full of FIR filters. And if you look at these filters, that's how they look. They basically, frequency responses are pretty much the responses that it passes, bandpass, passing components, modulation frequency components between 1 and 10, 15 hertz, very much the same as the filters which we designed experimentally by trial and error, improving the performance of the recognizers when we were designing raster. The only difference was that these filters are symmetric, zero phase filters, but that's about it. So this is quite amazing if you think about it. You take a speech, you tell it nothing about perception, you just say, what do I do if I want to optimally recognize speech sounds in this data, in this case context-independent phonemes, and you come with a spectral resolution of hearing decreasing towards higher frequencies. You come with the modulation components important between 1 hertz and 15 hertz, and so on and so on. So if you think about it, it is kind of exciting, and of course it was very exciting to us, obviously. So suddenly I start wondering, I mean, we do all these things to the spectrum, to the spectral envelope. We filter it and so on and so on. Why do people use the spectral envelope? Why do people think that information is in the spectral envelopes? And here we come, sort of, a lot of people can scream at me now, because, you know, this is a still working hypothesis. But my answer is, because we are engineers, and engineers always like to improve things. You know, if you want to build the engine for your car, you take the steam engine and you improve it. Right? So the same way, if you want to recognize speech and somebody, or understand speech, somebody gives you spectrograph, which was developed during Second World War in the laboratories for various reasons. Among them, I heard for listening to enemy submarines. And phoneticians, speech people get hold of that, they start seeing these spectrograms, and since they can read it, and since also short-term spectrum is easy to be used for synthesizing speech, you start believing that this is the right thing to do. And of course, so you just keep improving. Here we have a PLP spectrogram, about the same thing. There are some minor modifications, but it is still short-term spectrum of speech spectral envelopes. This is all what we have, right? But the spectrum is very fragile to linear distortions. We came up with some partial solutions in the form of rasta or now spectral mean subtraction and so on and so on. Spectral envelopes are very, very sensitive to co-articulations. That's the biggest problem which we possibly have in speech recognition is a co-articulation. So I start wondering and say, well, you know, but it's difficult to throw away spectrum entirely, because after all, here is frequency selective, no doubt about it, everybody would agree to that, including myself. And so what do you do about it? But then I realized, if you look at what is perception doing, actually suggesting what you should be doing with the spectrum. If you look at the simultaneous masking, simultaneous masking is telling you, I don't want to go to the details, but I want to summarize what it does. If you have one component at a certain frequency, and other component far away, further than the critical band or several critical bands, this component which is far away doesn't affect the detection of the sounds within a critical band. So there's an independency in the frequency. Temporal masking tells you exactly the same about time. Tells you if the two things happen further apart than 200, 300 milliseconds, they don't affect each other. Subsequently, if they happen with this what I call critical interval, 200-300 milliseconds, then they interact with each other. So then we have some more evidence. I mean, this is evidence which is coming from my friend John Allen's interpretation of some of the early works from the laboratories, Harvey Fletcher and so on. Listeners do recognize speech in independent frequency bands in a way that if you look what kind of errors they are making at different frequencies, and you put it down and you look what kind of error they make when you give them everything, you observe that that error which you get from the full band speech is a product of errors in these independent frequency bands under certain circumstances. Such a thing, of course, that these articulatory bands are independent, because otherwise you wouldn't be getting product of errors, right, of probabilities. If you look further, again, I mean, going back to 1965, people were suggesting it for ages, or at least for decades. If you want to recognize syllabi, you have to phonemes, you have to look at the whole syllable. So we have independence in the frequency, and we have reasonably long temporal intervals there. If you look, I mean, Monia is here, so maybe she can actually keep me honest. I mean, you know, if you look at what we know about the processing of speech in auditory cortex, you see these cortical receptive fields. Typically, they are frequency isolated, right? Localized. Some, not all of them, but most of them are. And they can be reasonably long. This is a quarter second, right? I mean, so this is coming from my friend Nima Mezgarani, whom we almost got here as an assistant professor. If we got a little bit luckier, he ended up somewhere else. But it's okay, he's still a friend, and we still hope to work together. So cortical fields are also suggesting us something. So more and more, and I can talk much longer about many, many reasons why I believe that I should just take this and put it on the door of every phonetics laboratory in the whole world. Reason for frequency selectivity of hearing is not to derive a spectral envelope. Reason for frequency selectivity of hearing is that you need to separate frequency components into independent bands. Then you get the temporal trajectories in these bands, and these are the ones we should be looking for when we want to get information from speech. Well, this is maybe slightly extreme position, I have to admit. Maybe we can compromise somewhere in between. But since not many people are saying that, I'm just saying it as loud as I possibly can. You can look even further. I mean, so if you look sort of like, you realize that all these independent frequency bands go all the way from the periphery of hearing, all the way up to auditory cortex. Right? There is this tonotopic organization of your brain, that frequencies at 100 hertz tickle one part of the brain, and frequency at 3 kilohertz tickle another part of brain, and they go basically, you go by the frequency map. Another interesting thing is that we have many auditory neurons. Actually, we have many more cortical neurons on the level of the brain than we have neurons on the level of the periphery. So it seems like that we go from periphery, where the firing is like every millisecond, maybe of the order of every millisecond, all the way up to the cortex, where the firing is much slower, but there is many more neurons that can fire, right? So it looks like that we have plenty of opportunity to build up these independent processing channels, and there can be many of them. I mean, you know, I don't know how many, but millions is even possible, but certainly thousands. The other interesting thing is about hearing system is that information doesn't only go from the bottom to the top, but plenty of that goes from the top to the bottom. So again, I mean, they may be independent frequency bands which are differently influenced by the top-down knowledge. So the processing is deep, of course. Deep neural network people would certainly agree to that. But it should be also long, because we should be using relatively long frequency, the segments of speech, maybe a couple of 100 milliseconds at least, if not more, and wide, meaning many processing streams. It can be streams coming from different carrier frequencies. They may have different spectrotemporal properties, but they can also have a different prior biases. Some of these streams are mainly dominated by the information out there, but some of these streams may be dominated by the things you believe, things you think you hear. So then coming with the proposal for multi-stream processing of speech. This proposal is up on the desk for a long time, but we still keep pursuing it. But you see by a number of colleagues who work on it with me. What we believe that information in speech is coded in many redundant dimensions, and you just hope that not all the dimensions get corrupted at the same time. And then your task is, you basically take the picture of the word, acoustic picture of the word, you form these independent streams, and then your task is to do some intelligent fusion where you can compare these streams to figure out if parts of the signal are being corrupted, if basically these streams are starting to yield very different pictures. It's possible that some of them actually are telling you lies, and to figure out how to leave out these streams. Which, of course, I'm not saying that we know how to do it, but I'm saying we certainly do work on it. So processing should look like this. You take your signal, you pick up different frequency components, you take long enough segments of speech, I bravely say up to about 1 second, maybe whatever, but at least 200-300 milliseconds, get information in some ways out of it. Again, I mean, you know, there's a lot of some, but I mean, this is a basic principle. Then you process this through many different processing layers, and then you do the smart fusion, where you use also your prior knowledge in this fusion, and you get posterior probabilities of speech sounds, which you are interested in, and these you should be using for recognizing information in speech. This pretty much actually summarizes the technical part. And since I didn't have many objections from you yet, not even from Andreas, I'm sure that he has some objections, but maybe, or Jason, not even Jason has had any objections anymore, but maybe I know I get it later, don't worry. I want to do a little bit of preaching here. Where are we now? So this is the way we recognize speech nowadays. We take the signal, we do some signal processing, we do some pattern classification, we put it into the coder, and we get out the message. So we use the signal processing, information theory, machine learning, and it got us as far as we are. This is a theory, I hope. That's what I wanted to sort of, so you know it works very well. Actually, people who work in speech, like speech perception people and sort of thing, they are kind of amazed at how it's possible that engineers actually could do something like that. Well, why to worry? I mean, everything is fine, right? All we have to do is to keep improving and improving and improving, and basically have a nice ride down towards lower and lower error rates. But you probably know what is coming, right? Well, there may be a point where some foolish people say, well, you know, let me push a little bit in different direction. Let me push a little bit up. And it may be painful, it may be difficult. You don't get the same pleasures from your colleagues because you are reporting papers which are not giving you the same results as the latest and greatest from Brno University of Technology or whoever is now the top of the line. Or, of course, Johns Hopkins, then Bowie, I hope he's here. Oh, no, I think he's not. Dennis rather works than listens to other people, you know. Well, because there may be some another minimum, you know. You just sort of essentially get out yourself, get a little bit busy, start thinking differently. It may push you and go further. Because where we really want to get is to the situation where we can process speech as is spoken by human beings, normal human beings, not the human beings which deal with the Siri on your iPhone. And because people do make all kinds of repetitions, fillers, hesitations, interruptions, they don't finish sentences, they don't speak grammatically, they use all the time they invent new words, especially teenagers or, you know, they speak with different dialects, emotions, accents, as you hear from my speech, and so on and so on. We'd like to have a machine which actually does the same. You would like to speak to the machine the same way as you speak to other human being. That's where current programs actually are. That's where also the program at Human Center of Excellence is. You know, that's where the frontier is. So we shouldn't be happy that Siri is out there. We should remember that there is always next corner. And actually there is many, 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 many levels where we can go. Sometimes I tell my students, if you get to speech, don't worry, it won't be solved by you by the time you retire. And if you ever get bored, you just go and work on Wall Street. You can at least make a lot of money. You know, but the speech is a very safe area because there is a lot of levels, right? How do we get there? Of course, so this is the current way, right? I agree that we still need. We need information and communication theory, machine learning, a lot of data. I put Fred here because it's our Fred, right? But many other people are, of course, of the same opinion. Personally, I believe that this is about the time. We get a great help, of course, from the technology. This is Gordon Moore, and Gordon Moore is, you know, thanks to not to Gordon Moore, but to people who he brought into Intel and other semiconductor industries. We are getting more and more power, and we definitely need it. You can see the current exposure of the deep neural nets and neural nets is mainly not because people think differently. It is because we have a very, very good machinery where we can suddenly train these neural nets on very large amounts of data. I think that we should also remember what Roman Jakobson was telling us, that there is a purpose in a speech. We speak in order to hear, in order to be understood. Not to be heard, to be understood. We should still remember that we need to know more about human communication, about speech production, about speech auditory perception, neuroscience, cognitive science, and all these disciplines which actually has been studied for many, many centuries almost, trying to understand communication, human communication by speech. In addition, I think we still need, this is John Pierce. John Pierce was a big shot at Bell Laboratories at the time. He is the one who is behind the telecommunication satellites, and he was heading the group which invented transistor and so on. And he was telling us speech actually needs people who are capable of designing simple, definitive experiments so that science of speech can grow step by certain step. I don't think that we do that too much. We run the experiments, we report the results, they are getting better and better, but I don't think that we are doing so many experiments which actually, after you run the experiments, you can say, I know this, I don't have to address it anymore. So I just put him up there because I think that actually he should keep us honest. Of course, he passed away quite recently, but he made many people in speech field very angry. Because, of course, that's what he was saying too. I mean, you can read it in the 1969 letter to editor. Speech recognition was so far, by 69, field of mad inventors or untrustworthy engineers. You can imagine how many people got happy with this, especially at Bell Labs, Rich may remember, right? And I had this on my wall, and I had a friend from Bell Labs visiting, and I think that I ran the risk that he wouldn't be friend anymore, because a lot of people got very mad with that. But he actually meant reasonably well, because he said, well, who am I to tell you what you should be working on? You should decide if it is worthwhile working on. Well, why am I working in this? I mean, it came out, fortunately, when I was getting in a speech, I didn't know about this letter, but I learned about it very quickly. So I still had to answer it, Well, one good answer, of course, is what we always say, this is very useful. Imagine that we can search all these huge databases of speech by machines, information extraction from speech is very important. Other good answer, which actually I sort of don't mind bringing up, is because it's there. Just like, this is Hillary, right? Edmund Hillary, he said, well, why did you climb Mount Everest? It's totally useless. So, well, it's there, right? I mean, it's a challenge. So spoken language is one of the most amazing things humankind ever invented. And isn't that upsetting that our machines cannot recognize it? We cannot build a machine which actually can deal with that when every child can deal with it. I remember when I came to US, I went to some meeting in Southern California. Bob Mercer was there. Bob Mercer is now not in speech anymore because he's one of these guys who decided that other things are better to do. But he was saying, I got in the speech and my child couldn't speak. Now my child almost goes to school and I still cannot build a machine which can recognize the speech. So it is a challenge. And it's a challenge which actually brings you also a long ways if you to understand ways to process other signals, what I call cognitive signals besides speech. Because the problems which you encounter in speech, very similar problems you encounter in recognizing images, recognizing smells, and so on and so on. Anything which basically machines cannot do too well and biology does very well. This is another thing which, of course, John Pearce was saying. In order to build a machine which recognizes speech, you pretty much have to implement intelligence and knowledge of language which is comparable to this of the native speaker. Well, I think that he meant it really is very difficult. But you remember this guy. In the early 60s or late 50s, he sort of said, how about going for the moon? People say, well, this is a little bit difficult, isn't it? But at the end, people did get to the moon. So I think that what is wrong about at least trying to understand intelligence and knowledge of the native speakers and trying to figure out the ways how to implement it in a machine. We may not get there, but we can at least get part of the way. I think on this note, I almost want to finish. I want to show that I also remember a little bit from Bob Dylan, from my early days. The one thing is that he says, don't follow leaders, watch the parking meters. Don't follow leaders is very straightforward, right? After the talk I gave it at Lyon, somebody came to me and said, what do you mean by watch the parking meters? What he meant was, solve your problems. You have enough problems. Don't solve other people's problems. I'm not saying that you shouldn't listen to other people, but don't get caught into problems of other people. There is plenty of problems there. Watch the parking meters. Remember where you parked, and make sure that you pay your fees. But what Bob Dylan meant is find your way through the life, find what you want to do, and stick to it, and do it. Sometimes it's painful, I have to admit. In my life, I almost got fired from US West. Rich might remember that, because Rich actually came to help us at the time. He was giving us some wise advices, so I'm very grateful for that, Rich. I'm glad that you are still here. But you remember the problems which we had. So, but it was partially because it was following your guts in that. And that's, I wish, to all of you. I mean, you must have heard it before. It's not, I'm not the first one who's saying that, but I mean it from the bottom of my heart. And on this, I would like to end and open to questions or discussion. I don't know if we have anybody who... Should I also be my own chairman? Of course, of course.
If nobody else is going to ask a question, I'll step in. But
I know.
Ask the next one. I want to know where you're parked.
Sorry?
I want to know where you are parked.
So my belief still yes, my belief still is that looking in a way the speech is being, and in general auditory signals, and in general cognitive signals are being processed in biology, is a good way to go. And I think we are ignoring still many things. Though, you know, surprisingly, after a lot of painful optimizations of our technology, you may find out that we are building machines which are not all that inconsistent with human hearing. I gave some examples of Rasta or these things. They weren't built because I knew about perceptual modulations. We just tried to optimize, and we looked at it, and whoa, what do you see? You know, we just wrote a paper for those of you who want to read. It's something which is printed, not what is only on the computer, though you can get it on a computer for IEEE proceedings with Jody Cohen and Rich Stern, which is called Perceptual Properties of Speech Recognition Technology. And basically what we are trying to do is look what technology is doing and how many of these things are already consistent with hearing. But I think it's more and more. So this is where I park, and where this is what, for better or for worse. I truly believe that we should know more about how, and we should know not only how the signals are being processed in the biology, but how to emulate that, because they are always two parts of the.
Which needs more work? I mean, is the speech recognition having difficulty incorporating what's known about biology, or is it blocking on waiting for more knowledge from biology?
I think that we still have long ways of implementing all what is known. The problem there is, you see, I mean, so that you always can get into this trouble. I showed you these three people trying to fly. The middle one is a copying, right? Copying is not the right way to go. So that's even, so you don't know exactly what kind of properties you want to emulate, because not everything what your hearing can do is used in the coding of speech. That, of course, is a big thing. So we don't know how to emulate these things. I think that we still have a catching up, but I don't know what other people who actually know more about it.
Since you're going to be disappointed if me and Jason don't argue, and Jason argues, so I have to argue now. So I had the pleasure to visit a museum in Europe where Da Vinci exhibit was made. And he talked about Da Vinci, who, among other things, came up with this, the quadrocopter, helicopter, and so on. And if you look at what he did, actually, and you read carefully about what he did, he really tried to copy things at the beginning until, by copying, he understood that things just, there was some principle, okay? Mm-hmm. So copying is okay, as long as you really try to uncover what's wrong with why things don't work.
Though
and based on your implicit assumptions that it's really by making mistakes that we learn, you know, so therefore I conclude that, you know, I mean, if you do something which sounds stupid, you know, why not? You know, you're going to learn something.
Yeah, that's one opinion.
Oh, but that's it. You're just doing okay, forget about you. Someone else, anybody else, another question, you know?
Yeah, well, but sure, I mean.
I'll just make a comment which I think fits in with what you described, a couple of the waypoints along your career. it seems to me that we discovered early on, so we'll start out with the spectrum in general tells you the position of the vocal tracts. The modulation frequency tells you something about the movement of the vocal tract. And we started out paying a lot of attention to the spectrum and learning in greater and greater and greater detail how that describes the position of the vocal tract. And then we used frames to space to tell the history of changes in spectral position. If we had discovered the modulation frequency first and thought of articulation as movement primarily, and then look to the spectrum to find out how the shapes should be determined, I wonder whether it would have been different. We looked first at metrics of vocal tract position and spent, 25 years arguing about the right way of signal processing to depict that, and then more recently started looking at alternative ways of describing the movement, the time dimension. Any comment?
Well, for one, I don't know how, clearly estimating spectrum of speech is a good thing. Reason I brought up Homer Dudley in 1940, he never mentions the word of spectral envelope. All he talks about is dynamics of the signals coming from the frequency, from his filters. I think he was on the right spot. My experience with speech is that we don't need very high details of the spectral envelope, at least not in the first approximations where we are here. So, sure, if the people look at the spectrograph and realize what spectrograph actually tried to do, spectrograph really tried to emulate what Homer Dudley was saying. Look at how the spectral energy in given frequency band changes. For various reasons, it plotted out the spectrograph. And for yet another technical reasons, it plotted out the spectrograph, which is a linear scale. But I think that was very misleading. I think that
scale, there was a switch on it. You could go to the training scale, which was more like a lot.
Is it so? I think it was more difficult because it was heterodyne, right? I mean, sort of. You may be right that there was one, but I don't know. My spectrograph could only do linear scale at the time. It could do two different frequency resolutions. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that is true. But I can quote it here actually because Tom Crystal just recently told me that Arthur House claimed that invention of spectrograph and adoption of spectrograph by speech community slowed down the speech research by decades. He truly believed that because, people are looking too much in the spectrum. And I think they got slightly obsessed with that. True, Jack, you are absolutely right. If we started on different leg, we might end up in different corner, and we might have a different set of problems. And it wouldn't surprise me that, of course, after all this preaching to you, of course, somebody comes and says, well, Hynek, you are only half right, or something. I think that you still need spectrograph. And true, you remember this cortical receptive field. Some of them do look at all frequencies, but not many of them. Most of them look just at a thing. So this is my comment. Yeah?
So I'm going to continue on both threads.
Sure.
About copying and second thread about this production-based thing. What's your view on a production-based processing of speech, and recognition of speech?
It doesn't hurt to know about the way the speech is being produced. It can give you some insights. It shouldn't mislead you too far, because you can understand very well of speech of the parrot, right? It has very different vocal structure, I can tell you that. So production is
talking to each other.
But
you talk about how we interact.
True, but it can produce a very decent speach, and you know that there's more than one way to skin the cat when you produce speech. So if I had to, I see these efforts for articulatory-based speech recognition, and it's not that it's not interesting. Obviously, it is. I don't know if I would go this direction, but this is my opinion. But certainly it doesn't hurt you to know how the speech is being produced.
Do You may have sprung yourself a trap there.
Oh, sure, no problem.
Yes.
Parrots and minor birds imitate, they pick out one format and they imitate it.
Exactly.
And they get the dynamics right.
Yeah, wouldn't you, that is the dynamics is a very, very gross shape of the spectrum, right? Yeah, that is right. Minor bird has only one resonance which it can change. No, it's, but, you know, it's just my opinion. I'm not saying that I'm right. I mean, if I had to bet, I would bet on perception rather than on production. If I had to put money on it.
So that implies that you think of them as separate?
They are to some extent separate, yes, because the production happened because you had certain perceptual system. That's how the speech evolved, in my opinion.
So you think that the
Absolutely, absolutely.
The great thing about having cortical research going on now is that you have access to a place that knows about both articulation and
Well, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And put them together.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yes, more you know, better it is, right? I mean, I'm not saying a thing, but you know, I truly believe that you can see properties of hearing in speech. That was the purpose I brought up these examples of spectral bases or temporal filters coming from the speech and the fact that we try to recognize speech sounds, because speech evolved this way. That speech evolved so that is well understood, well heard, subsequently well understood.
So if you, sorry, someone else's question. Asking for many questions.
We have plenty of time. Students. I was for you guys, it wasn't for these guys. Andrea, good.
So you mentioned Siri as like a shining example of where speech recognition is doing well. To what extent do you think that's due to like speech adaptation and things like adding in more context versus better signal processing or better models of speech?
A lot of data. That's, I think, is the main kind of thing behind it. The recognizer in Siri, there's no big magic, you know. There are no new technologies which we wouldn't know about, which we didn't use. But maybe I shouldn't speak so much about Siri because Siri is kind of closed box. This is Apple, right? But I can speak about Google Voice because Google people are much more open. What is there? Google Voice has nothing special. As a matter of fact, it uses this old PLP, which was invented some 30 years ago, as a features. Then there is a hidden Markov model, but there is a lot of data. I heard that they are retraining every week. And so this is this Gordon-Moore part. Gordon-Moore Flagellinek kind of tandem. You know, machine learning, signal processing, basic signal processing, and a lot of data.
So a follow-up question: where do you think the next big improvement is going to come from? From adding kind of more information into the column? Or
No, I think that actually at the moment we are seeing big explosion in various other ways of modeling, of recognizing speech sounds with all these deep neural networks and so on and so on. So I think there will be some progress on the side of how we recognize speech. I think that slowly, it's fair enough to say that GMM are fading, old technology is kind of a little bit fading into background, because if you go to speech conferences nowadays, mainly it is neural networks. And of course that allows you various architectures and various tricks and different types of features. Some of that, I believe, what I was... Sorry? And neural networks. I shouldn't be saying deep. I mean, deep is a secondary thing, but networks with complex architectures, maybe that's what I would like to say. Yeah, complex architectures is possible. Now, I think that there will be some progress in that direction. Okay, let me thank you myself. Sorry that we didn't have a chairman. I mean, I have to do